Right, our reading this morning comes from Daniel chapter 4, and it starts off Nebuchadnezzar's proclamation. King Nebuchadnezzar, to those of every people, nation and language who live on the whole earth, may your prosperity increase. I am pleased to tell you about the miracles and wonders of the Most High God, and that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his miracles, and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I had a dream, and it frightened me. While I was in bed, the images and visions in my mind alarmed me. So I issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon to me, in order that they might make the dream's interpretation known to me. When the magicians, mediums, and Chaldeans and diviners came in, I told them the dream, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. Finally, Daniel, named Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him, came before me. I told him the dream. Belteshazzar, head of magicians, because I know you have the spirit of the holy gods, and that no mystery puzzles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I saw and its interpretation. In the visions of my mind, as I was lying in bed, I saw this. There was a tree in the middle of the earth, and it was very tall. The tree grew large and strong, its top reached the sky, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit was abundant, and on it was food for all. Wild animals found shelter under it. The birds of the sky lived in its branches, and every creature was fed from it. As I was lying in my bed, I also saw the visions of my mind, a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He called out loudly, "Cut down the tree and chop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump with its roots in the ground, and with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the tender grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew from the sky, and share the plants of the earth with the animals. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let him be given the mind of an animal for 7 periods of time. This word is by decree of the watchers, and the decision is commanded from the holy ones. This is so that the living will know that the Most High God is ruler over human kingdoms. He gives them to anyone he wants and sets the lowliest of peoples over them. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because none of the wise men of my kingdom can make the interpretation known to me. But you can, because you have the spirit of the holy gods." Then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was stunned for a moment, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king said, "Belteshazzar, don't let the dream or its interpretation alarm you." Belteshazzar answered, "My lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, whose top reached to the sky and was visible to the whole earth, and whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all, and under it the wild animals lived, and in its branches the birds of the skies lived. That tree is you, your majesty, for you have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown and even reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to the ends of the earth." The king saw a watcher, a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, 'Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump with its roots in the ground, and with a band of iron and bronze around it in the tender grass of the field. Let him be drenched with dew from the sky and share food with the wild animals for 7 periods of time.' This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree of the Most High that has been issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from the people to live with wild animals. You will feed on the grass like cattle and be drenched with the dew from the sky for 7 periods of time, until you acknowledge that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms and gives them to anyone he wants. As for the command to leave the tree stump with its roots, your kingdom will be restored to you as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, may my advice seem good to you, my king. Separate yourself from your sins by doing what is right, and from your injustices by showing mercy to the needy. Perhaps there will be an extension of your prosperity." All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. As he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, the king exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you. You will be driven away from people to live with the wild animals, and you will feed on grass like cattle for 7 periods of time, until you acknowledge the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms, and he gives them to anyone he wants." At that moment, the message against Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people, he ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky, until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like birds' claws. But at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. Then I praised the Most High, and honoured and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does what he wants with the armies of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can block his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time, my sanity returned to me, and my majesty and splendour returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and my nobles sought me out. I was re-established over my kingdom, and even more greatness came to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heavens, because all his works are true and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word.
Thanks, Robert. Well, fascinating bit of history there, isn't it? I'm going to pray and then we'll dive in. Father God, please speak through me this morning, and please work in my heart, please work in all our hearts, so that we are men and women of complete integrity, like Daniel, but more importantly, like you. We prayed in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. I reckon all of us would agree that honesty is a really important thing, that honesty is a really good thing, but I also reckon we'd all agree that sometimes we're tempted to kind of just stop short of 100% honesty. And with that thought in mind, let me share a story with you, a true story, took place middle of the 1800s. I'm just going to read what's here. It says, when the father of the great philosopher Immanuel Kant was an old man, he went on a perilous journey through the forests of Poland to his native country of Silesia. On the way, he encountered a band of robbers who demanded all his valuables. finally asking, "Have you given us all?" And only letting him go when he answered, "All." When safely out of their sight, his hand touched something hard in the hem of his robe. It was his gold sewn there safely, and quite forgotten about him in his fear and confusion. At once he hurried to find the robbers, and having found them, he said meekly, "I've told you what was not true. It was unintentional. I was too terrified to think. Here, take the gold in my robes." Then, to the man's astonishment, nobody offered to take his gold. Presently, one went and brought back his purse, and another restored his book of prayer, while still another led his horse toward him and helped him to mount. They then entreated his blessing and watched him slowly ride away. Goodness had triumphed over evil. Now, whether or not you think Immanuel Kant's dad needed to be quite that honest, you got to admit that he had conviction. You got to admit that he had courage, and you got to admit that in our world today, there's not very many people floating around who would do what he did. And yet, as Christians, God calls us to be not 99% honest, but 100% honest. Ninth commandment, you know it. It says, "Do not give false testimony against your neighbor." Ephesians 4:25. "Therefore, putting away lying, speak the truth." Colossians 3:9 says, "Do not lie to one another, since you've put off the old self." That's just the beginning. The Bible's got heaps to say about our honesty, or our need to be honest. And the inescapable conclusion is that God doesn't like 99% honesty. He says, "I want 100% honesty from my people." Why is that? Well, ultimately, it's because God himself is 100% honest. God is truth. God's revealed the truth to us, and he commands that his children walk in the truth just like him. Contrast that with Satan. Satan, on the other hand, is a liar. The Bible calls him the father of lies. And so his desire is that we walk in darkness. His desire is that we hide the truth and obscure the truth and deny the truth. And so think about that. Whenever we're confronted with a situation where the truth is at stake, whatever we say next or do next, we're actually imitating one of two people. If we tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, we're imitating God in heaven. If we tell anywhere between 0% and 99% of the truth, we're imitating Satan. What's any of this got to do with Daniel? Quite a bit, because we've just read about a dishonest king who says very nice things about God, but then completely ignores God when the going gets tough. We meet an honest dream interpreter who's got some really tough news to tell a king, but he boldly tells him the truth anyway. And then we meet a God who is always faithful, always honest, and always does exactly what he says he'll do. And in a nutshell, this chapter, it's all about God bringing Nebuchadnezzar face to face with the truth. The truth about who really sits on the throne. Because Neb, he's been living a lie, and it's only the truth that's going to set him free. And it seems like a lot of times pass between chapters 3 and 4. Nebuchadnezzar says, "I was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace." Doesn't sound like he's off fighting battle campaigns and doing the war thing. This is middle-aged Nebuchadnezzar, comfortably ruling the world and living in luxury. He's kind of kicking back after all these military conquests. Life is good for Nebuchadnezzar. So this good chunk of time's probably passed since the whole fiery furnace thing last week that we talked about then. And the first thing is Robin was reading that jumps out. This is a section actually written by Nebuchadnezzar, probably with some help from Daniel. And verse 1 starts off with King Neb writing to the world. And he says, "To those of every people, nation, and language who live on the whole earth." And all that follows, it's kind of like King Neb's testimony to the world of how he became a true believer, a true follower of the Most High God. In the last few weeks, we've seen him say a couple of nice things to say about God, and he's been kind of impressed with God. But at this point, something seems to happen to his heart. Look at verse 2. He says, he's telling this to the whole world. "I'm pleased to tell you about the miracles and the wonders of the Most High God that he's done for me. How great are his miracles and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. So something amazing's happened to Neb. And he wants the whole world to know what's happened. It looks like he's finally found God, or to be more theologically correct, it looks like God's finally found him. He wants the world to know about it. And so he's going to give us his story. And in verse 4, the picture kind of changes from color to sepia, and it gets grainy and a little bit flickery because this is the flashback. Okay? He's taking us back to pre-converted, pre-saved Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to tell us the story of how God brought him to himself. It all starts with this, though, the hypocrisy of Nebuchadnezzar. Because in this flashback, we discover that this king was at rest in his palace. He was flourishing. From his perspective, life is going great guns. Life's just peachy for King Nebuchadnezzar. He was the man. He had the kingdom. He had arrived, beaten all his enemies. Now he's kicking back in the palace. He's got everything he wants. Life is great. But then in verse 5, life stops being great because he gets another dream. And it's been a long time since his first dream, but as soon as he gets this dream, he goes, oh man, this dream means something, and it's got a bad smell about it. He knows it doesn't bode well for him or the kingdom. Verse 5, it says he was frightened and alarmed. Okay, this is the most powerful guy in the world, has a nightmare, and now he's frightened and he's alarmed. So everything's been going great, but now the dream, it's ruined everything. What's he do? Look at verse 6. So I issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon to me in order that they might make known the dream's interpretation to me. And you'll know from a few weeks back, this is exactly the same play he made when he had his first dream, isn't it? We've seen this happen before. By default, he just calls in all the hocusy-pocusy kind of people, and we go, this is really, really dumb. For starters, he knows perfectly well these guys failed him first time he had an important dream. They didn't have a clue. But he knows equally as well that Daniel succeeded, and Daniel's God helped him with the true interpretation. And even in his own words, Nebuchadnezzar has said this, God is a revealer of mysteries. Chapter 2:47. He knows that Daniel's God can deliver like no one else can. 3:29. He's previously declared that Daniel's God is the most high God. Chapter 3:26. Neb knows all this stuff about God, and he's been incredibly impressed with God. And yet for some reason he has a nightmare, and who's he call in? All the pagan mystics. I want you guys, who always fail, to tell me the meaning of my dream. And this is where we start to see that hypocrisy of Nebuchadnezzar. On one hand, he's very happy saying all these great things about God, Daniel's God, but when the rubber hits the road, he doesn't want to run to Daniel's God. He's a bit of a hypocrite. His mouth says one thing, but his actions say something completely different. So he goes to church at Christmas and at Easter, and he loudly sings God's praises then, but for the rest of the year, God doesn't get a look in. Okay? Because his heart really belongs to Babylon at this point. He's a hypocrite. Even so, we're left wondering, why is he such an idiot? Because he knows these guys. I love what Alistair Begg calls these guys. He says, these characters are reliably, consistently, magnificently incompetent. Okay? It's a good description of all the hocusy-pocusy people. And Neb runs to them. Why? Why didn't he say, I want to see Daniel, because he came through for me last time and his God is huge? We're not told, but I reckon there's a few reasons. I reckon there's a few things going on. Part of it is Neb is just still thoroughly Babylonian. And he just reflexively does what Babylonians do when they get a scary dream, and he runs to the mysticky people. I reckon another part of it is that Neb knows that despite previously praising God and saying great things about God, he's been ignoring God, and so he kind of feels a bit sheepish about running to Daniel to call on his God. But I reckon the biggest part of it is that Neb has a pretty good idea what his dream means. Big tree, chopped down. Okay, the overarching idea, it's not exactly rocket science, is it? He knows this is going to be pretty bad news. He knows Daniel's not going to pull any punches. And worst of all, he knows that Daniel's going to be correct. And so what do you do when you don't want to hear the truth? Well, you ask everyone else first, desperately hoping that someone else has some other explanation that might be better than the one that you suspect is true. Maybe one of the Babylonian magicians will be able to come up with an interpretation that somehow bodes well for me. Because I don't want true news, I want good news. And this happens a lot. You see it in the Old Testament. Why did plenty of Old Testament prophets lose their lives to angry kings? Because those kings, they didn't want true prophecy. They wanted feel-good prophecy. We see it happen today. Why do people shop around until they might find a church that says it's okay to sleep with your girlfriend? Because people don't want true advice. They want liberating advice. Or why do some people only ever make friends with people who might support their non-binary gender preference? Why? Because they don't want any true comments. They want affirming comments. I could go on. You get the idea. Our world's filled with people like Neb who don't really want the true news. They want good news, feel good news. The Apostle Paul told Timothy this sort of thing would happen. 2 Timothy chapter 4, 3 and 4. For the time will come when people will not tolerate sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. They will turn away from hearing the truth and will turn aside to myths. In other words, because people won't like God's message, they're going to start hating God's messengers, and so they'll get rid of the messengers, they'll bring in new messengers so that they preach a message that they want to hear instead of the one that they need to hear. And I reckon this is going on in Neb's mind at this point. Deep down, he knows what God's saying in the dream. It bodes badly. He doesn't want the truth at this point. He wants anything but the truth. He wants something nice and fluffy that's going to let him sleep at night. And he calls in the pagan, hocusy-pocusy people. He didn't think he'd like the truth. He thought he'd prefer a lie. Neb ends up being disappointed because in verse 7 we discover that all the Babylonian men, they couldn't come up with a lie, or maybe wouldn't come up with a lie. Let me read it to you. When the magicians, mediums, Chaldeans and diviners came in, I, Nebuchadnezzar, told them the dream, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. And again, I suspect, like Neb, they went, oh, this is a pretty bad sounding dream for you, mate. But instead of having a guess, they go, we don't have a clue. We're stumped. Pun intended. There's not a lot of honesty, is there, in King Neb's court? Neb, he's a hypocrite, sings the praises of God 1 minute but won't run to him for help. He'd rather use his dark magicians to get a positive interpretation than the guy who knows the truth is going to give him a true interpretation. And then all his pagan helpers, they come in and won't even hazard a guess at the negative meaning of Neb's dream. Not a lot of honesty in King Nebuchadnezzar's court. Come verse 8 though, Daniel steps onto the scene, and in contrast to all the liars in the story so far, he's a guy who has this integrity. He's a guy with complete honesty. So second point, honesty of Daniel. I want you to notice as we read the next couple of verses, and this gives a bit of support to what I've been saying, just how confident Neb is that Daniel can give him an accurate interpretation. Look at 8 and 9. Finally, underline that word, finally, Daniel named Belteshazzar after the name of my God, and a spirit of the holy gods is in him, came before me. I told him the dream. Belteshazzar, head of the magicians, interesting title, isn't it? Because I know that you have the spirit of the holy gods, so plural there, he's still a bit confused, and that no mystery puzzles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I saw and its interpretation. So he's absolutely convinced that Daniel's the guy for the job, isn't he? He's dreading the honest answer. But all the other guys had failed to come up with a convincing alternative, and so he's kind of got to face the music. He's got to be confronted with the truth. And so the king begins to tell Daniel the dream. It's a strange old dream. Robin read it to us before. Massive tree reaching up to the heavens, branches spreading out right across the earth. It's strong, it's healthy. Animals are beneath it. Birds are living in it, producing all this fruit that feeds everyone. This is an amazing tree. And from what happens next, we know that this tree, it's a picture of Nebuchadnezzar, the spread of his rule, Babylonian branches just spreading out across the earth. It's what had happened in history. Neb's got a pretty good idea that he's the big tree, huge, healthy, flourishing. And that would have made the next bit all the more terrifying, wouldn't it? Because in his dream, he sees this angel come down, and the angel says, cut down the tree. Chop off the branches, strip off the leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee and the birds from its branches. Doesn't sound real good for Neb, does it? Okay, if he's the tree, the guy coming with the chainsaw, that's bad news. It's kind of scary. He's freaking out. But, and there's a but in verse 15, but leave the stump with its roots in the ground and with a band of iron and bronze around it in tender grass of the field. It's a weird dream, isn't it? Bring the whole tree crashing down, leave the stump so that there's a chance for regrowth, but actually more than that, put a band of bronze or iron around it so that it doesn't just split and decay and rot and just break apart and die. So it's protect the stump, protect the stump, protect the stump. It's a weird dream. But look at the next bit, verse 15. Still talking about this stump. There's a change here. The angel says, let him. That's interesting. Let him, the stump, let him. So the stump is a man, is a person. Let him be drenched with dew from the sky and share the plants of the earth with the animals. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let him be given the mind of an animal. And so the tree suddenly becomes a him. So there's a bit more clarity here, isn't there? The angel isn't talking about a kingdom flourishing. He's talking about a man flourishing. He's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. And this him, he's going to be knocked down from the heights of splendor, given the mind of an animal. Wow. But it's not going to be forever. It's going to be for 7 periods of time. No one knows what that means. Does it mean 7 years or 7 months, or 7 just means a complete period? Could be any of those things. And we read it, why would God do this to this guy? What's the point? What's the purpose? God's actually got a really good purpose in doing this. Look at verse 17. This is so. Okay, the reason this is happening is that the living will know that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms, and he gives them to anyone he wants and sets the lowliest of people over them. And in other words, the purpose in all of this is so that Neb knows and that the whole wide world knows that the Most High is the ultimate ruler. It's not Neb after all. It's God. And so this is all about God exposing the lie that Neb is the ultimate ruler. It's about God revealing the truth that he is the ultimate ruler. That's the purpose. But you can see why Neb's freaking out. You can see why he didn't really want the truth, can't you? Because even though he doesn't get the finer detail, he's bright enough to connect the dots that this is going to go badly for him. That the trees are great and powerful. It's going to get chopped down. This is not good news for Neb. Notice, though, that Daniel, he hears all this and then he's got a reaction. Verse 19, Daniel was stunned for a moment and his thoughts alarmed him. So Daniel doesn't just get the gist of the dream, he gets all the detail because God's helping him. And he's stunned that something so terrible is going to happen to Neb. And it's hard to know what he's feeling at this point. Maybe he's grown in a weird sort of way to like crazy King Neb. Maybe he's feeling a bit of compassion and, I can't believe this is going to happen to you. Maybe he's feeling afraid. I mean, this is the king who's got this flaming hot temper and who's very happy throwing people in ovens or ripping limbs off or cutting people in pieces. He's a tough cookie. Maybe Daniel's going, man, how do I tell this guy that he's going to turn into a crazy cow-like fella? How do I do that? So Daniel's wrestling with this stuff. He's got to make a choice here. He could outright lie, like the Babylonian guys, and go, I haven't got a clue what that means. You could give him like 90% of the truth and go, I'll leave out the worst bit so he doesn't get too mad. Or he goes, well, I'm God's mouthpiece, I'm all in, I'm going to tell him exactly what this means. Daniel's thinking this stuff in his head because if you look at the next verse, it's kind of like he's squirming or something, because Belshazzar says, don't let the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Okay, Neb's like a guy who knows he's got cancer, and he says, Doc, I know it's bad news, just tell me the truth, tell it like it is. I know it's not good. So what's Daniel do? He tells it like it is. He doesn't hold back any detail. He doesn't soften it. He just gives him the whole truth. He's completely honest. But this is important. He's not cold about it, is he? It's not, Neb, you deserve what's coming, you rotten sinner, you. No, he doesn't do that. Look at verse 19. My Lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you and its interpretation to your enemies. I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. But gee, I really wish this was about someone else, because this is tough. This is bad. He's speaking the truth, but we might say he's speaking the truth in love, isn't he? He's speaking the truth in love. And he tells the king, you're the great tree. You guessed it, Neb, it's you. You're great, you're powerful, your rule spreads far and wide. But in God's time, and that's all going to change. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to start acting like an animal. You're going to live in a field. You're going to eat like an animal. You're going to eat grass. And this is going to last for 7 periods of time. Bad news, Neb, but don't forget the stump. God's going to preserve you. God's going to leave something there so that it can grow back on the other side of this humbling experience. And he even tells him why. God's doing this all to show you that he's the ultimate authority, not you. Daniel doesn't hold back. He just tells him the whole truth, and it's a terrible truth. But it's a truth laced with compassion, isn't it? He doesn't just deliver the message and then duck for cover, I'm out of here. He offers Neb some advice, and in verse 27 he says, maybe, just maybe, God's judgment can be delayed if you stop sinning and start doing what's right. That takes guts to say that to a king, doesn't it? But do you see the honesty of Daniel and the compassion and the courage all together? Here's the most powerful guy in the world who doesn't miss a heartbeat by ordering someone's gruesome death. Along comes Daniel and he says, you're going to be humbled. You're going to be like a cow for 7 periods of time. And maybe if you stop sinning your head off, maybe God's going to delay that. He's got courage. But it's courage mixed with compassion. He's saying, here's what you need to do to kind of delay this thing from happening. He's courageous, he's compassionate, he's speaking the truth in love. And I reckon he's a great example for us. This is how God wants you and I to live in Babylon. Ephesians 4:15, it's clear. God tells us that we should be speaking the truth in love. In other words, we've got to courageously and compassionately share the truth. We put those together, courageously and compassionately share the truth. And this can be hard, hey? This has huge potential to be costly for us in all sorts of different ways. It may well cost me money if I'm completely honest in filling out my tax form. Okay? It may well cost me a promotion if I report that incident at work correctly. It may well cost my reputation if I share a biblical view on sexuality. It might cost me a friendship if I talk too much about, there's a judgment coming and you need to get ready for it. Being unflinchingly honest in Babylon is really hard to do, and it sometimes can have and sometimes will have some pretty nasty consequences for God's followers. And because of that, we know that there's a real temptation sometimes to kind of weigh up the pros and cons of telling the truth. Have you ever done that before? Well, I know this is the truth, but if I give the truth, this could happen. And we kind of weigh up the pros and the cons of telling the truth. And we try to figure out, is it really worth it in this case? But God says it's always worth it because God is always worth it. God doesn't call us to be pragmatically honest. He calls us to be to be completely honest, always speaking the truth in love, regardless of the fallout. Because at the end of the day, it's only the truth that can set people free, isn't it? It's only the truth that honours God. Daniel's completely honest. What about you? How do you got this living in Babylon? What happens next? Well, we clearly see the faithfulness of God. As I said earlier, God calls us to this absolute honesty because he's absolutely honest. It comes out clearly in everything that happens next. Look at 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, God said it would happen, and guess what? It happened. Here's how it plays out, verse 29. At the end of 12 months, as he was walking around on the roof of the royal palace, the king exclaimed, "Is this not Babylon the Great, that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?" Okay? He's forgotten the dream. 12 months has passed, and he's like, well, I'm the man, and I might as well admit it. Look at what I've done. I'm incredible, and this great big city and the hanging gardens and all of it, it's a testimony to my greatness. I'm the man, and I want everyone to know. He's forgotten his dream. God hasn't forgotten his promise, though. Verse 31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, so it happens immediately, a voice came from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you." And so within an hour, he goes from, I'm incredible, I rule the world, to I'm a cow. Okay, it's quite the drop, isn't it? He goes stark raving mad. He gets driven out of the palace because he's so loopy. He starts eating grass, starts sleeping outside. His fingernails grow long and his hair grows long. So it's definitely, whatever 7 periods means, it's long enough for his hair and his nails to grow. He's completely unfit to rule the kingdom. That the greatest guy in the world has become the biggest fool in the world. He becomes a wild animal. How humiliating, how humbling, how different to the image he's been trying to project. Remember the statue from last week? It's all been me, great, 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 and now he's eating grass. He's brought to his knees literally. But remember that stump kind of bound up with the band of iron and bronze? The stump's protected, and one of the most remarkable things is that while this 7 years or 7 months, whatever it means, while that period of time's happening, no one knocks off crazy King Neb. None of the power-hungry Chaldeans had him murdered. None of his aspiring relatives went, now's our chance to get the throne. That the stump was protected just as God said it would be protected. And in that culture, this is a miracle. We're going to see next week just how miraculous it is. When Neb dies, the family goes nuts and there's murders and all sorts of crazy stuff happens. But God's protecting the stump, even though the stump is acting like a cow. And at the end of the 7 periods of time, God's faithful. He does a miracle. He doesn't just do a miracle in his mind, though, and make him, okay, I'm human again. He actually has done a miracle in his heart. Because as far as we can tell at this point, Neb's a changed man. He's been saved. He's been converted. He's a Christian. And this is where that movie kind of image, it changes from the color, from the sepia and the flickery screen back into full color. This is back to present day. This is where he finishes the flashback. And look what he says in verses 34 and 35. These are the words of a changed man. Then, after coming back from thinking like a cow, then I praised the Most High and honored and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdoms from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does what he wants with the army of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There's no one who could block his hand or say to him, what have you done? This is a huge contrast. Look at verse 30. Back in verse 30, Neb had said, is this not Babylon the Great that I have built to be a royal residence of my power and for the majesty of my glory, my. Now it's him. See the change? Wonderfully, miraculously, Nebuchadnezzar, he's a changed man. For the first time in his life, he can see the truth of things. Through this terribly humbling experience, he's come to see that God is God and he is not. That the lie's been exposed. The truth has set him free. And in the next verses, we see God just keeps all his promises. Neb doesn't just get his sanity back and his kingdom back and his majesty and splendor back. He actually ends up becoming even more successful. God completely regrows that tree from the stump. Neb is back, baby, but he's a new man. He's not back as the old Neb, he's back as the new Neb. Look at the very last words recorded of Neb. Very last words. Now, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of the heavens, because all his works are true and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride, just like I was. He's a changed man. He's finally able to see and appreciate and love and serve Daniel's faithful God. It's one of the greatest conversions in history. And I reckon Neb's salvation, his being saved, it's great proof that God's able to save anyone. No one's too hard or too lost or too proud or too pagan for God to save. He can easily take out a heart of a stone and give a heart of flesh. And if you're here today, you're not yet a Christian, I want you to pray something like this. Please, Lord, do to me what you did to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Maybe not the cow bit. But God, please humble me so that I stop thinking or stop believing the lie that I'm the hero of the story. And so I see the truth that really your son Jesus, he's the hero of the story. Please do to me what you did to Nebuchadnezzar. Please work a life-changing miracle in my heart so that I can worship you and praise you just like Nebuchadnezzar did. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't too far gone for God to save. And no matter who you are, what you've done, you're not too far gone either. If you want to talk more about this, or if you want someone to pray with you about this, Daryl's going to be over here after the service just for that reason. But whoever you are this morning, don't lose sight of God's faithfulness. Through the dream, through Daniel's honesty, God spoke the truth in love to Nebuchadnezzar. Ultimately, it led to his salvation. And no matter how tough things get for us in Australia, and they're getting tougher as Christians, we've got to remember the same faithful God still on the throne, and he's still calling us to speak the truth in love. And we just keep doing that. We just keep speaking the truth in love, speaking the truth in love. Why? Because what's our world need? Our world needs truth, doesn't it? And as Jesus says in John 8:32, only the truth can set people free. So let's be courageously and compassionately honest in Babylon. Let me pray. Lord God, thank you for your wonderful faithfulness. Thank you for Daniel's wonderful honesty. And Lord, I pray that you help each of us this morning to realize that you're not calling us to pragmatic honesty. You're calling us to complete honesty. Lord, help us to be able to be men and women who speak the truth in love. Lord, help us to be like Daniel and just boldly say the truth, but then also have a heart that bleeds for the person that we might be speaking with because they don't know you or caught up in something. Lord, help us to be courageous. Help us to be compassionate. And Lord, we pray that you help us to just hang on to the truth that you are God. You're on the throne. You are King, and we are not. We pray it in your Son's beautiful name. Amen.